Well, welcome to the Gonzaga Socratic Club, especially a big welcome to parents who are here. I'm glad you're here this weekend. The Gonzaga Socratic Club takes as its inspiration the Oxford Socratic Club, which was presided over by famous Christian apologist C.S. Lewis in the 1940s and 50s. And our objective is the same. The reason for the name Socrates, or Socratic in the title, is we commit ourselves to follow the argument wherever it leads, to look philosophically at issues that relate to the Christian faith. And that was pretty much the objective and aim of the Oxford Socratic Club as well. The topic we're going to be talking about today is secularization in higher education, is one way to frame it. There are a number of ways we could describe it, but we're thinking about the problem that institutions of higher education across the United States for about a century now have dealt with a gradual drift away from religious orientation. Those universities and colleges that were founded with a religious affiliation in many cases no longer have that. If you run down the list of some of the great universities in Protestantism in the United States, you think of universities like Chicago, Brown, Princeton, I can run down the list, you know. Big names that we think of that were founded with religious orientations. In most cases, you have to search very hard on their websites to find even a vague mention of the Christian origins of those institutions. For the most part, Catholic institutions have not faced this problem of secularization, at least not in as severe a way nor as quick a way as Protestant institutions. But the signs of problems are present across Catholic higher education as well. Indeed, you might say one of the reasons that motivated the papal encyclical Ex Corde Ecclesia was in part the concern about secularization. What are Catholic institutions of higher education all about, and what objectives will they have into the future? And that's going to be the subject of our discussion today. We are very honored and pleased to have two really good speakers who are going to be addressing the topic. Our main speaker is Dr. Eric Cunningham, who is a professor in the history department here at Gonzaga University. He has a BA degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder and MA and PhD from the University of Oregon. His specializations are on modern Japanese history, and he has particular interests in Japanese culture and religion and how they relate even in broader ways to culture and to cross-cultural dialogue. Our respondent, that's a tradition that we pick up from the Gonzaga Socratic, from the Oxford Socratic Club as well, is to have a respondent to help prompt discussion. Our respondent today is Professor Michael Trelevin of the Political Science Department here at Gonzaga as well. Professor Trelevin was an undergraduate here at Gonzaga a long time ago, and he has theological and political science degrees from the University of Toronto. His interests are in multiple areas of politics, but especially politics and the environment, particularly with respect to the Northwest. So, if you would, let's welcome our speaker, Dr. Eric Cunningham.
I think in the spirit of our Christian inquiry here, I'd like to start with a prayer. This is from St. Anselm. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O God, let me know you and love you, so that I may find my joy in you. If I cannot do so fully in this life, let me at least make some progress every day, until at last that knowledge, love, and joy come to me in all their plenty. While I am here on earth, let me learn to know you, so that in heaven I may know you fully. Let my love for you grow deeper here, so that there I may love you fully. On earth then I shall have great joy in hope, and in heaven complete joy in the fulfillment. The Lord, through your Son, you command us. No, you counsel us to ask. And you promise that you will hear us so that our joy may be complete. Lord, I am making the request that you urge us to make through your wonderful counsel. Give me then what you promised to do for your truth. You, O God, are faithful. Grant that I may receive my request so that my joy may be complete. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time in this Fall Family Weekend to attend another session of the Gonzaga Socratic Club. I'd like to thank my friend, and colleague, Dr. David Calhoun, for inviting me to present the ideas here today on a topic of importance to us all, and another friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Trelevan of the Political Science Department, who generously agreed, very close to the deadline, thank you again, to respond to these remarks and to offer what I think would be a uniquely qualified perspective on the question of exploring and its implementation, not only in the Catholic Academy in general, but at Gonzaga University in particular. To just move right ahead here, Ex Corde was promulgated in 1990. Ex Corde was promulgated, as Dr. Calhoun said, in 1990, and its purpose was to lay out the general place and function of Catholic universities in the modern church. It says a little bit of all kinds of things, including ministry, faculty composition, research, and curriculum. Thousands of pages have been written about Ex Corde. I certainly don't tend to present anything like a final word on its significance to the church or to the Catholic. But I would be happy if today we could at least mark the real beginning of a serious dialogue on Catholic identity based on Ex Corde. By this, I do not mean a discussion about its vague norms and its hazy mandates, but rather a conversation that focuses upon the all-important spiritual ideal envisioned by Pope John Paul II, which was a world of flourishing Catholic scholarly communities, united in their love for the faith, their obedience to the magisterium, their awareness of the Church's primary mission of bringing souls to Christ, and their desire not only to advance the causes of human dignity and social justice, but to protect the treasures of the Catholic cultural heritage as well. This is what Ex Corde is really about. Even if the central message has been obscured by angry debates, on one hand, between liberal theologians who seem to think that Ex Corde poses the greatest threat to academic freedom since the Third Reich, and conservative Catholics who seem to think that implementing Ex Corde will somehow wave a magic wand and reverse the tide of secularism and have once come out the Catholic Academy. I don't think there's ever been a document that makes so few demands and lays out so few rules about anything that's able to hold such status as a makerhood. That phenomenon alone is very interesting. It is essential. It's essential reading for anyone who has an interest in the Catholic academic life. Near the end of the past summer, we talked about this. I wrote 5 short articles on Ex Corde for something called the 1887 Trust. This is a group of faculty and parents who are trying to take some steps to beef up or to consider thinking about changes and improvements in Catholic identity here at Gonzaga. My colleagues have been complaining about this room setup, so I understand. But this is what it is. And so, if anybody is interested in maybe reading these, if you go on the 1887trust.org, I would be very happy to enter into a conversation about these things and about what might be done on a local level. So if any of you are interested in that, we'll just offer that as a possibility. What I would like to do, I don't have that much time, and I don't like to go over time. Some of us think really do like to know these things. But I'm very interested in hearing Dr. Trelevan's comments as well. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about the document itself, but I would like to do this, give a brief history of Ex Corde and its reception in the Catholic Academy, and then compare what Ex Corde does and says to the kinds of conversations that we're having, right? Compare Ex Corde to other Gonzaga university-wide discussions. And then the third thing I'll do is discuss prospects for our Catholic identity, and what I mean by that is explain why I think the restoration of a vibrant doctrinal Catholic identity may be not in the cards. I think maybe we're beyond that, although hope springs eternal, I suppose. So I guess we can take up that question later. So, Ex Corde, I believe, looking at Ex Corde from the standpoint of history, not theology, it seems to spring as the convergence, it springs from the convergence of two major developments in the post-World War II church. One was the attempt to improve the academic quality of Catholic universities after a period of general decline in quality during the 1950s and 60s. The other was the implementation of the modernizing reforms of the Second Vatican Council. Now, both of these reforming movements took as their model for success the modern progressive secular order of the post-war era. Now, looking at this from the standpoint of 2013, when that very civilization seems to be perched on the brink of catastrophe, we might look back and say that that was kind of a bad idea. But this was the height of the Cold War, and the world was divided into rival ideological camps, led on one hand by the Soviet Union, and on the other by the United States. The Soviet Union, of course, was an openly totalitarian and militaristically atheist regime. The United States was primarily a Judeo-Christian country, whose economic and foreign policies were directed to the preservation of free markets, free elections, and the proliferation of 18th century Enlightenment ideals, however strategically filtered through the lens of 20th century American agenda. So the church can probably be forgiven for hitching its fortunes to the free world democratic community, even if doing so required them to willfully forget that long before Marx and Lenin came along, Enlightenment liberalism was considered the primary threat to the existence of the church. And if you're not sure what I mean by that, I would invite you to look up a link to Pope Pius IX's Syllabus of Errors, which he lays out the entire Enlightenment project of the peace of peace, according to the Catholic theology doctrine. So the point I guess I'm making is that neither communism nor free world democracy provided optimal structures for the proliferation of an expressly Christian world. But in the mid-20th century, there were no other options to embrace. I wonder if that might not have been a good opportunity for the church to actually forge a legitimate third path through democratic capitalism and Soviet communism, right? To provide a true way out of the trap of 20th century existential despair. But it didn't. It essentially, I think, traded in a sacred eschatological worldview for the promises of progressive materialism. In Augustinian terms, we might say that the church moved from being an icon of the city of God to a mere law-abiding citizen in the city of man. So accordingly, the reform of American Catholic universities took place in an exclusively modern progressive context. When a group of Catholic university presidents met in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin, to determine, this was in 1967, to determine how the Catholic Academy might participate in church renewal, their real practical goal was the very modern pursuit of academic excellence. Their yardstick for excellence was not the Christian gospel, it was not neo-Thomistic theology, and it was not the Jesuit Nazis to New York. It was rather the economically prosperous, socially integrated, and politically enfranchised public university. And in their idealization of academic excellence, the administrators decided that, and this is Father Hesper, Notre Dame owned the Land O'Lakes House for the meeting. So here's, if you can move this. I think this is a quote. In a Catholic university, all recognized areas of study are frankly and fully accepted, and their internal autonomy is affirmed and guaranteed. There must be no theological or philosophical imperialism. All scientific and disciplinary methods and methodologies must be given due honor and respect. And 1960s, this meant Marxism, post-structuralism, under the trends in academics that were coming into vogue at the time. Now, historian Philip Gleason characterized the Land O'Lakes statement as the declaration of independence of the Catholic universities from the Roman hierarchy. And while it was never issued as a universal policy statement, it has undeniably shaped the ethos of Catholic university administration ever since for the last 4 decades. When John Paul issued Ex Corde in 1990, it was with a clear view to closing the rupture that had opened between the Academy and the Magisterium in the ensuing 20 years. The Vatican, this was a necessary corrective to the Academy. This was an act of theological imperialism, an unwelcome intrusion of the Pope into the free and happy domain of modern academic life. To the emancipated theologian, it wasn't even the content of Ex Corde that mattered, it was the very gesture. And it's funny to think that, because when you do read Ex Corde, it's very difficult to find the heavy-handed authoritarianism of these theologians' darkest fears. As a statement of authority and domination, Ex Corde is much more like a nice scoop of vanilla ice cream covered with marshmallow sauce sitting in a bowl of margarine. It's a very happy document. And it's relatively short and very, very readable. And I think that everybody should, if you haven't read it already, this book, I would suppose probably has. And you may not agree with that assessment, but you keep looking for Ex Corde as something we can latch onto to say, okay, now if we just do this, right, everything will be great. There's really not a whole lot there to do that with a few things. That's when you get so nitpicky about, oh, how many were the 51% Catholic faculty or not? You know, and then everybody laughs at that. I guess it becomes sort of a non-issue. All of these issues that we turn into issues become non-issues because I don't think that the point of Ex Corde was to be a manifesto. It was, I think, the first phase will probably take 100 years, if successful, to bring the universities back onto the reservations. What it does say is it lists among its norms and such. It points out 4 essential characteristics of the Catholic university. And here they are. Christian inspiration, not only of individuals, but of the university community as such. A continuing reflection in the light of the Catholic faith upon the growing treasury of human knowledge to which it seeks to contribute by its own research. Fidelity to the Christian message as it comes to us through the Church. And 4, an institutional commitment to the service of the people of God and of the human family in their pilgrimage to the transcendent goal which gives meaning to life. These are the intolerable, impressive academic freedom-crushing constraints that had American theologians reaching for their guns for years, even now. I have not mentioned the infamous Mandatum, which actually was not part of Ex Corde. The Mandatum was made a part of canon law in 1983. Ex Corde merely provided an opportunity for the Pope to remind the bishops of their duty to enforce the Mandatum. What is the Mandatum? According to the U.S. bishops' own guidelines, the Mandatum is this, quote, an acknowledgement by church authority that a Catholic professor of a theological discipline is teaching within the full communion of the Catholic Church. Bishops were supposed to ensure that every Catholic teaching Catholic theology in their diocese was teaching it faithfully, that is, according to church doctrine, and making sure to distinguish between their own opinions and church doctrine so the two might not be confused. That's pretty much it. No threats of hellfire, no state burnings, no excommunications, no threats of termination of employment, no threats of removal from the classroom, no penalties, no sanctions of any kind are listed in this document. And yet many bishops, and probably most bishops, and we don't know because these conversations were very confidential, either ignored their obligation to enforce the Mandatum, or they just gave blanket approval to the faculties under their jurisdiction because they didn't want to deal with the headache of, talking around with academics about their stuff. And the bishops have certainly been involved with a lot of other legal and administrative issues in that. And so you can understand why they thought the Mandatum might not be good at the time, if they even cared about what was going on in the Catholic schools. In 1996, the American bishops, after consulting with universities under their jurisdiction, sent back a modified version that they were willing to sign. The Vatican sent it back the bishops saying they needed to be more accountable for the teaching of theology in their colleges. And finally, in 1998, a fourth version was approved by the U.S. bishops, and in 2001 it became effective. Now, this is interesting. I never knew about this until the last few years. In 2006, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops carried out a 5-year review of the implementation process. And maybe that I was not paying attention. I came here in 2003, and I don't recall there being much of a discussion on our campus about any short-term or long-term plan to be in compliance with Corde in 2005 and 2006. In those years, we were commencing 2 long-term projects upon which Corde has had very, very little, if any, influence. These projects, and this is my faculty knows too well, is the writing of a new court curriculum and the implementation of a comprehensive outcomes and assessment. I'd just briefly like to show you some of the fruits of our core discussions. Here, now I'm not revealing any state secrets here. This is stuff that can be found right on the Gonzaga website. Except that it doesn't look like. I can make the point without necessarily showing this, but we came up with 2 official models of what our core should look like. The cores were, you're looking at Corde, which demanded we place a priority upon theology. If you look at our 2 core documents, one is called the Big Questions Core Model, and the other one is called the Methods of Inquiry Core Model. They don't really, there is no systematic path of theology through life. It would be much nicer to show you that graphically. Now, Dr. Calhoun here drafted something called the Nation Integration, which actually does have a 4-year path of theology all the way through to the end. That particular core model never made it to the Gonzaga website. You know what I'm going to do? Because I think this is very important. I'm actually going to go to our website. Oh, there's it. Okay, this is magically here. These were the core models. And this is really instructive. Gonzaga University cultivates reflective responsibility because it is rooted in Jesuit Catholic humanistic traditions. That's the last you will read of Jesuit or Catholic anywhere in these documents. The last, you will not see the word God anywhere in these documents. And this is what we call these are our baccalaureate goals. Knowledge developed through the practices of liberal humanistic learning. That's fine. Intellectual skills, habits of mind, heart, ethical reasoning and action, thoughtful evolving spirituality, blah, blah, blah. Here is the first of these, the disciplinary foundations core curriculum. I want to show you very quickly. Here's the theological component. 100 level religious studies, in which the outcomes, principles, beliefs, and practices of Christianity and other world religions. That's the extent of there's no mention of Catholic theology. That's the extent of religious training. Then you move on further down. A 200-level religious studies, where you pretty much do the same thing. Principles, beliefs, and practices of Christianity and other world religions. And that's it. Now the other one was called the Big Questions. Big questions for you. And I just want to point out here what the religious component of this is. The In the first year, nothing. In the second year, the question is, what is it about my faith? And in this, the objective that you meet is to understand, or to understand the principles and beliefs and practices of Christianity and other world religions. That's it. The next, I wanted to show also, sorry if I'm leaving up too much time here, but this is the one that Dr. Calhoun wrote, the Nation Integration Model. And I just want to show you, this is one that didn't make it to the website. This is one that didn't make it to the website. We didn't really discuss this. We presented it one day. I think I talked for about 2 minutes about it. But here, first year, biblical scripture, second year, Christian doctrine, third year, moral theology and philosophy. Fourth year, you have senior capstone. You've got the full piece, including all of the other disciplines. But again, this is not one that was presented on the Gonzaga website.
You should give credit to my colleague, Dr. Doug Fries, too. We co-authored that. So it was two of us.
And I guess the 6 or 7 other people that
Communicated.
we were able to actually submit it to the AVP and to have it presented at the conference. But it hasn't really been talked about. All right, so this is, those are the fruits of our core discussions, and they're not over yet. We've been doing this for years, and we have not yet figured out what it is. Maybe for over 10 years, we haven't decided yet. On the other subject, which is really amazing, and I won't show you necessarily any documents on this, but our outcomes and assessments program. For the happy few of you who don't know what I'm talking about, outcomes and assessments is a pedagogical term that describes the process of determining desired educational outcomes, establishing instructional objectives to meet those outcomes, preparing curriculum to support student learning of the objectives, and devising instruments to assess the learning. Some of the old fogies present in the room may know this process under the archaic term of teaching grade. Now, the outcomes and assessments is something that we spend tens of thousands of dollars every year in faculty conferences. A database that the professors are uploading all of their assessments data to basically do test scores and who passed what. At a cost of somewhere between $35 and $45 per student per academic year. We are spending tens and thousands of dollars on teaching and grading. Now, how many dollars have been earmarked for implementation of that Corde? To my knowledge, 0. We do outcomes and assessments, of course. We say we do outcomes and assessments so that we can optimize the performance of our educational mission, but we've never made a passing attempt at working the norms of Corde into our outcomes and assessments project, despite the fact that the 3 senior administrators in charge, none of them are here, 3 senior administrators in charge of this program are all religious studies professors. There's nothing having to do with Corde in there. Now, we probably really do outcomes and assessments because, like almost any other school in the world, we have to do it to satisfy our regional accreditation authority so that state and federal financial aid money keep going our way. In 2011, a 10-year review was conducted. A 10-year review of Corde was conducted by the U.S. Council of Bishops, and the report actually came out in January of this year. The USCCB managed to efficiently encapsulate the work of 100 bishops, and the Catholic faculties and presidents in their jurisdictions in a 1-page blurb that they posted on their website. And basically, you read this, it's not worth reading. Everybody loves everybody. But that year, that was what took place in 2011. And again, I don't recall anything happening that year in 2011. 2011 was the year that we wasted no time in complying with the HHS mandate to change our health insurance coverage to cover birth control and abortifacient birth control and contraception. Even though we had a one-year safe harbor clause, to think about it, maybe to follow the example of schools like Notre Dame that sued the government, or to listen to some of the American cardinals who spoke openly of the fact that this was a violation of the rights of religious employers. Well, we didn't do that. We very quickly decided that we were going to acquiesce to the HHS mandate. Now, one thing we did do, again, it was 2013, and I really would love to show you this. In 2013, we put together our first sustainability initiative climate action plan. This is a 35-page document that talks about all of the wonderful things that we're going to do to reduce our carbon footprint to zero by the year 2050. It's filled with subordinate goals. Like by the year 2020, we're going to reduce our carbon emissions by 20%, and by 2050, we'll reduce it. By 2035, we'll reduce it to 50%, and by 2050, on that glorious day, we will have our emission standards at something like zero carbon emissions, right? And that's fine. I mean, I guess we certainly need to do this, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't implement a similar in compliance with S40, to put ourselves in compliance with S40 by the year 2050 with subordinate target dates for hiring faculty, adding theology courses to our curriculum, and maybe adding some catechesis to the curriculum, hiring a Catholic studies professor or two. Why don't we do this? Well, the answer is we don't do this because we don't really want it. We're not interested in this. This is not a priority of ours. And I guess I'm coming to my conclusion here. Because those of us who talk about this talk about it all the time. I don't want this to degenerate into me taking pot shots at our institutional priorities, but I do wonder why every time the state or its agents tells us to do something, we just jump. Whenever the church provides us with a set of guidelines and kindly asks us to consider implementing it, we either ignore it or flaunt our indignation with the very idea. So what does all of this mean? As somebody who's often questioned why our university is less successful in explaining Catholicism than in explaining it away, I'm certainly among those who wish that we were serious about living up to the ideals of S40. I don't think we will, because at this point in Gonzaga's history, the majority of our students, in fact, are not Catholic. And those who are Catholic have been conditioned by Gonzaga's culture and curriculum to think and act as if the church hierarchy were a hostile force. In the spirit of Land O'Lakes, Gonzaga Catholics have declared themselves independent of Roman imperialism. I don't mean this as a criticism, it's an observation that will serve to explain someday why we stopped being a Catholic university. This is just the way the cookie crumbles and all decisions have consequences. I don't believe that anybody among the power structure here is allowing our identity to go extinct out of a sense of malice. We have very good, lovable people here. People who are committed to service and to justice and to the flourishing of the university community. But to paraphrase William James, your reality is what you attend to. Right? Where we are today, boldly claiming a Catholic identity while repudiating the Church's rightful claims to our obedience, this is the reality because about 40 years ago, Catholic university administrators and theologians began to form an intellectual culture in which the assumptions of the modern secular world and its critical academic project were normative. They withdrew their obedience from the Church and placed it in the service of their own spiritual preferences. Mistaking the city of man for the city of God, they confused the distinction between the two loves associated with these cities and allowed an earthly love power to stand for the heavenly love of God. With their earnest attempt to find God in all things, they concluded, as did the pantheists of old, that God is all things. The tragedy of this mistake was not that their looking out, but that it was redirected from the Creator to the creation, which they believed they could transform through social and political action, detached from the sanctifying grace, the flow from heaven, when, through the humility of obedience, we make our work a sacrifice of divine praise, instead of endless pursuit of worldly satisfaction. In short, we are going exactly to the place that we've been wanting to. Now, final question before I sit down and listen to Dr. Treleaven. Is the question, can this be changed? Will it be changed? I don't know. I don't suppose it will. But if we were going to, I think we would start here. It certainly won't happen without corrective action radically and quickly. But this is a Jesuit school. The 35th, I'm sorry, the one that they never referred to, but the one that's most recent, of the Jesuit proceedings, the Jesuit congregation, reminds the Jesuits to place all of their works upon the foundation of the spiritual exercises and proceed from there. Well, the spiritual exercises are built upon this foundation. It's called principle and foundation. St. Ignatius of Loyola writes, man is created to praise, reverence, and serve God, our Lord, and by this means to save his soul. All other things on the face of the earth are created for man to help him fulfill the end for which he is created. From this it follows that man is to use these things to the extent that they will help him attain this end. Likewise, he must rid himself of them insofar as they prevent him. This needs to be in our mission statement, and in our core curriculum, and in our sustainability plan, and in everything else we do. Because this, the Jesuits are the directions, this is the foundation. So with that, I will close. And as I said before, this again to the inevitable question. Well, what about filling the favorite social problem of the choice? If we move beyond silly arguments and embrace, just for the hell of it, embrace obedience. Right? St. Benedict says obedience is the first step. We embrace obedience just as an experiment. I think we would quickly move beyond the fights and then put ourselves into that truly free space where we can act as thinkers, as intellectuals, and as lovers of the world. One of my favorite quotes is from Marshall McLuhan. Right, one of the beauties, one of the advantages of being Catholic is that it confers a complete intellectual freedom to examine any and all phenomena with the absolute assurance of their intelligibility, not of their correctness, but of their intelligibility. We can think about anything. We can talk about anything. But that doesn't mean that all truths are true. So, thank you for your kind attention.
Professor Treleaven.
I want to thank Eric, Professor Cunningham, for inviting me for the Socratic Club, for allowing me. It's a striking bit of heroism upon the part of the Socratic Club to have not one professor speaking, but two. I said heroic, not proved. I think, first of all, Professor Cunningham for sure raises a very important question, a set of questions for us. That all sorts of parts of the university are important to us, but the Catholic identity surely should be among those that are important, indeed quite important. So the foundational question is, in what sense is Gonzaga University a Catholic university? How can it demonstrate that it's a Catholic university and live out that identity? These are powerful questions. They were powerful questions before Corde Ecclesia. They remain so and will remain so, I hope, for a long time. I'm going to respond to a couple of points that I agree with, and maybe some that I want to amend. I want to also say that I'm very grateful that Professor Cunningham concluded his remarks by citing Marshall McLuhan, a fellow Canadian. And I heard him speak whilst I was at University of Toronto before he died there in 1980. And I would see him walking to or from Mass every day. He went to Mass at a church, a parish church, on or near the University of Toronto campus, rather like St. Aloysius is near to us. So he was pretty well daily getting to Mass. He was a very devout Catholic, for sure, in a very secular university, the University of Toronto, although he was linked with the Basilian College, the Catholic College, University of St. Michael's College. So he's something of a symbol of a person who takes this journey of being Catholic very, very seriously. And so I want to pose not a counter, but a supplement to Professor Cunningham's remarks, at least the first point I want to make. I think the issues before Gonzaga University's community are, first of all, spiritual. And they could begin with this question that in some ways Eric is also asking. Does the university or some active and significant part of it want to be a Roman Catholic university in some important ways, and maybe plural ways? Do we want to be? I was amazed or struck as a social science type that when we had this initial reception and debate and controversy over Ex Corde, how predictable often the issues were. And the issues weren't false or unreasonable for being predictable, but I think a great question was missed at the time and not dealt with creatively really by any of us. That is to say, is Pope John Paul II's letter really an occasion for us to say, well, what do we want to be as a Roman Catholic university? We had a few shouting matches, as professors want to do. We had a few points lobbed back and forth, but I don't think we ever allowed ourselves to dig into the question of being a Roman Catholic university in our place, in our setting. So I thought our response at the time was unproductive, uncreative. It wasn't that I wanted everybody to 100% agree with me or with John Paul II or something. At the very beginning, what I wanted to do was take the question, the fundamental question, as a serious matter worthy of working at. And again, I think that maybe my second point about that episode was that I think we failed to understand or didn't want to take up what would have been and is hard work. It's not supposed to be easy to be a Roman Catholic university. We put crucifixes up on the walls, I hope, for good reason. So that episode struck me as a lost opportunity. The differences of judgment, the differences of opinion, the starting off words that each person had should not have been the last words that the folks had. So as a controversy, it was unproductive at the time. I think that I think there are several points in Professor Cunningham's analysis that I agree with. But I would add that I think the universities in the 1960s, and I was just a wee high school lad, mind you, at the time, so my knowledge is incomplete. But the perception I have is that all across the United States, American universities went into a period of turmoil, whether they be secular or religious in their affiliations. And the Catholic universities went through a period of turmoil, particularly with what it meant to be a modern Catholic university, with the standard and secular demands that were rising and properly rising in many cases for scholarship, for teaching, for academic excellence, to use a very tired phrase, and all that. So in addition, our universities, Catholic universities across the world, we're seeing the decline of the men and women who had done so much to found these places and staff them, that is, the members of religious orders, male and female religious orders. The decline in numbers, but also the growth in many other departments where there would have been no way to staff them with members of religious orders as we diversified the departments and enrollments grew. So some of it was the decline in vocations, some of it was the overall growth of the university enterprise. So that Catholicism at the time was not only lost a bit, or the feeling of it was lost a bit, for perhaps reasons that people were fleeing religion or feeling the oppression of religion, but that the nature of the university enterprise was expanding. So just that. I wonder if we could also think of the university, Gonzaga University, as a pastoral question rather than a disciplinary question. I think that the university, or the Catholics at the university, might do better to be talking to one another about this university as a Catholic university and its future. That the statements from the Vatican, from the Bishops' Conference, may start us off in a conversation, may illuminate some of the conversation, may ignite a few controversies and the like. But what I find in my reflection on Gonzaga University as a Catholic university is that we have not, I'd say us Catholics at the university, we have not been in conversation with one another. There's a politician we had in Canada some years ago, Monique Bergien, when she was Minister of Health. She was making a remark about controversies over healthcare reform in Canada, but also in the USA. And she said a very striking thing to me, I thought, was a very penetrating remark. You can tell a lot about a political community by what it does not discuss, as well as what it does debate. What it does not debate, argue about, quarrel about, may be unimportant. Or it may be difficult and painful. Or it may be underappreciated. I'm, as a Roman Catholic, I'm inclined to think strongly that Catholicism is quite important. Thank you. I'm inclined to think that it is difficult in our contemporary times. And I think that the possibilities of taking the Roman Catholic Christian tradition seriously are as yet unappreciated, underappreciated, I should say, by so many of us. But I think there's a pain in it that we're avoiding. And I think we need to learn to look at that pain, need to make sure we don't needlessly inflict pain on one another, and then try to have those conversations. I would quarrel some with Professor Cunningham's word of restoration, in part because it has so many loaded connotations. But I think and I was going to use the word revival, but that also has loaded connotations in American Christianity. So I would, I think there's a revivification or rejuvenation that we need to be doing. I want to make, so I made one point here about what I think the contemporary issue amongst us is that it's essentially a spiritual question. Do we want to walk this pathway of being Roman Catholic Christians, those of us who are Roman Catholics? Do we want that? Do we want the milieu in which we live and work to be influenced by that, if not perfectly that? Do we understand that the wider cultural narrative amongst us, a consumer mentality, a fairly materialistic approach, careerism, those kinds of projects of individual ambition, or the wider American setting in which we live and work are not particularly favorable to a Christian and Roman Catholic pursuit. They're not necessarily destructive, but we have to be alert to them, we have to be self-aware. I would say, too, that a great deal of what it means to be Catholic is sacramental. This sacramental spirituality and discernment. And so those are the things that I think we ought to be landing on in any productive dialogue. It's very much at a grassroots thing. Do we wish to be a Roman Catholic institution for 2013, for 2013, and so on beyond? The scope also of what we learn from perhaps should be thought of. The Bishop of Spokane, a year or two ago, spoke in a series that Father Michael Monger ran on the Jesuit tradition that influences Gonzaga University. And the bishop, who's not a Jesuit, came and gave a very nice address, I thought. I had not, prior to that, heard him speak. He's brand new here in the diocese. And he said something to the effect that I think is humbling for us and an invitation for us. He said that the diocese, the Spokane Roman Catholic Diocese, has much to learn from Gonzaga University. Okay, that's very nice. Complimentary, feeds our sweet little ego nicely. And then he said something that I think bears us paying attention to. And Gonzaga University has much to learn from the local church. And he stressed the local church from the diocese, he said. He said, from the real life of the church, from the day-to-day life of the church. So I think there's something there. The scope of what we embrace as a university can be critiqued and perhaps made more effective for us. The document, Ex Corde, concludes with Pope John Paul II calling for our free and responsible contributions to the mission of the church in the world, to the church's evangelization, and in a way that would be appropriate to universities. Well, I think that that's an invitation to take ourselves seriously and to be responsible and to make contributions, but it is an invitation to do some hard work. And I don't want to fight over documents and canon laws. I'm not learned in canon law anyway, but fortunately I'm tenured, so it doesn't matter. I would just say that that invitation to confront, to embrace, to struggle with the ambiguities and the multiplicity of voices in being Catholic should be productive for us, rather than something that we're a little bit scared to talk about because we have bruised feelings over things. I don't think we should be hurting on those feelings. You certainly should not be hurting mine. Let's be clear. But I think the church at Pentecost, this is an image that seems to be applicable to me. Remember Pentecost, okay? And there the multiple believers of different languages and ethnicities and backgrounds and probably different preferences, perspectives, values, all the things and fears and anxieties. They nonetheless heard and thought they understood one another despite everybody speaking their own languages. Well, it didn't last. If you read Acts of the Apostles, lots of things happened and the church wasn't always so neat and pretty as that day. But it remained in Scripture because they thought it was a lesson of what our possibilities are with the grace of God. So I think maybe we should struggle with the conversation of what it means to be a Catholic. And whether our new core is helpful or not should be a question. That the purpose of being a Catholic university is important. I think, is it clear? Yes, it is. But we have some hard work to do as a Catholic university, and in a secular environment with many of our colleagues and friends here on the faculty and staff not being Catholic and probably having no intention of becoming so. So I think we owe the university and ourselves serious hard work. And so maybe this was meant to be, maybe it was hoped that I would tear apart Professor Cunningham from beginning to end. But he's younger than me, and I'm not sure I can do that. But I want to just shift the gears, not to disagree, but to say I think the emphasis needs to be not from the top down, but horizontal emphasis amongst us. And with that, I will thank you for your patience. Sit down.
No, actually stay there, and Professor Cunningham, if you'd come up, let's thank. So, questions, discussion? I would ask one thing, try to keep speechifying to a minimum. So try to ask questions rather than make speeches, but go ahead. And you can direct your question to either or both of them if you like.
Questions, criticisms, objections, unmerited, undeserved praise?
Well, I have a question. I mean, you talk about meeting and getting together and making a horizontal plane and working together. Right now, there's an impact on the students that are here right now. And we sent a son here 10 years ago when Father Spitzer was here, and there was somewhat of an impact, a Catholic impact. It's pretty much gone now.
Yeah.
And it's really sad to us because our grandkids are coming up, and if this university is going to wait for 100 years, financially, we're not going to wait around for it. We're going to find a Catholic university for our next generation to go to. So what can we as parents do to make an impact, get these guys talking faster, returning to more teachings of the church, or being somewhat of a Catholic university identity, a Catholic identity? Because I don't see any Catholic identity here. I see a basketball identity, which I've followed for 40 years and absolutely love. However, I don't see a Catholic identity at this university.
Well, I would say two things. One is that there is Catholicism here. Whether it's as much or and as well as it should be, quite a nice question. But I said work, and I meant work. I mean, I think that the Catholics at the university should be working hard to figure out how they can do this better. We rely, I think here's my thing, we rely on people at the top, a president of the university, or a bishop, or the bishop's conference, somebody like that, somebody about it to tell us what to do, and then we'll all obey. Well, the cows are on the barn, Matt. That's not how it's going to be productive. It's not going to happen. I just think that's not how this is going to go on. So I think the work means that you, if this is not the kind of Catholic university you think it should be, you and anybody else should say so. Now, you may find other people who think it's too Catholic. I think you still think that. But I guess I'm a political science professor, okay? Now, if people stopped arguing with one another, they would get the right idea that he doesn't need me. And we're talking disaster at that point. So, I think people should, with respect for one another, and with one another, quarrel about these things. I guess I'm saying lobby, whether or not you and I would end up agreeing 100% about all the particulars, that's not much of my point. But you have to also recognize that there are an awful lot of people at the university who are religious, or they're not practicing Christians of any sort, and they're not particularly attracted to what they think is out there in Catholicism or Christianity, and they're part of the dialogue with non-believers. And that's hard work sometimes. So I think that we're in the least church part of the United States, Washington, Oregon. So the university has a particular local mission to a part of the American world that we have to have some kind of dialogue with those who disagree with us, who aren't interested in things that we think are terribly valuable. So I'm sorry that's not, I don't believe there's a one neat solution to this.
Wasn't it when you look at the history of the Jesuit order, the whole purpose was to go to the unchurched parts of the world? I mean, Francis Xavier went to Japan, and went to Italy, and India, and Japan, to China. Isn't that, to me, that's the Jesuit cares. Shouldn't that be what we're doing? We want to find the unchurched and even convert.
Well, we want to become,
Crazy idea.
we want to become deeper and truer disciples ourselves.
But there's a, no, I agree with that. And I think the best way we're going to get people to the fold is to example, embody those Christian values that means so much. There is, it's a good thing that we're in the most unchurched part of the world, because that's why I call it the Tablet. That's why I call it the Smet. Because nobody here is Christian. We actually are in a place where we do speak a common language. We are in at least a formally Christian culture. Everybody knows, everybody has enough of a common vocabulary to understand why a Catholic school would want to evangelize. So, to me, that argument, look at what we're up against, has never held much water, because that's what as you suggested, the cows are definitely in decline. And one of the things that you've said in years past that I've been very impressed with, and I think you're right about this, is we haven't had places where Catholics are taught this. I mean, I was wondering if that's, what might be done.
I mean, the Catholics amongst us, say, on the faculty, well, there are differences of personality. There's the so-called liberal Catholics, conservative Catholic. Pastorally and sacramentally, they're all part of the communion of the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't think, as a matter of fact, I don't think this is straight on fact, we have not had that horizontal dialogue amongst us, lay and clerical. I think we've been not necessarily avoiding it. Sometimes they put up. But that's where we have to have a conversation.
No, you go ahead. You call.
I took a lot of criticism for our girls coming here to Gonzaga, and we have daughters that are seniors, because it isn't as Catholic as people thought it should be. But we found in the 4 years that our girls have been here, they have found faith, they've kept it. So I think you can find what you're looking for, and so it doesn't make Gonzaga any different for us than them having gone to a state school in Colorado. So that's good. I'm thankful for that. But my question is, if there is any obedience among, and I'd be most particularly interested only in theology teachers, so if you're teaching scripture or you're a Catholic studies professor, are you signing or are you obedient to the mandatum or no? Is there any requirement?
We would not know.
Okay, so I was just curious. Thank you.
Well, I just, for the record, correct me if my recollection of the history is mistaken, but in terms of those 3 core models, Eric?
Yeah.
I was proud to sign the document written by Professor Calhoun and Professor Kreese. And there was a point, was there not, when the faculty was pulled, and these 3 core models were placed side by side.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, a substantial plurality of the faculty at Gonzaga University voted for the Ignatian integration proposal. I forget the breakdown in percentages, but I think big ideas came in a distant third, and then that inquiry one,
Disciplinary model.
the disciplinary model, came in second, and Ignatian integration came in first.
Yes.
And I don't know that there was any administrative follow-up with respect to that particular outcome. But my hopeful thought at that point was, and I'm a leftist lunatic, and I'll just go on public having said that, but I'll quote President Nixon, who used to talk about a silent majority a long time ago. And what I became aware of is that there are faculty all over this campus who weren't involved in any of the core curriculum committees and who didn't participate in a public way in any of the debates, but who really found the Ignatian integration proposal attractive and compelling and consistent with Gonzaga's Catholic and Jesuit identity. Now, I know that the AVP just posted the new core, did she not, today?
Yeah, yes.
And I have not had a chance to look at it at all. But I felt like that was a minor victory, because these other ideas, if I may just speak only for myself, were horrible. And because Calhoun and Crease took the initiative, and it was a grassroots, bottom-up, faculty-led initiative, to bring a proposal forward that was consistent with our traditions of Catholic and Jesuit higher education, it stopped these other proposals just dead in their tracks.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely right, and you're rehashing of the events. And your departmental colleague, Wayne Palmer, I thought was one of the most interesting, who has no stake in the Catholic thing at all, but spoke up in the faculty senate, just railing against the other models and why he really, really wanted to see the Catholic mission honored, cherished, promoted, because that's the school he came to teach. And that was the foundation that gave him the best students he'd ever had. And I was very moved to hear him talk about that. And so you are right, there were an awful lot of people on campus who gravitated toward David and Doug's model. And thanks to people like you, I think they actually did enough traction to make a splash, maybe in the mind of the people in a small splash.
I do have an informational note on that. The central feature of the Ignatian integration proposal is to make the traditional Jesuit theme of faith and reason central to the core, and the AVP's recent communication suggests that that is not going to happen. There's a process outlined for exactly how a faith reason course designation will be considered, but the likelihood of it actually being put into the core, I think, at this point, is very dim. It's not going to happen.
Any other question, please?
Yeah, as a student, I can say at this university, we say that we are Catholic, but we also say that we are humans and that we are about social justice. Now, particularly in recent times, social justice and humanism have come to encompass something within teaching and within student action that go contrary to traditional church doctrine. And so I guess my question is, how can we balance being a Catholic school and also being a humanist and a social justice-based school, if that's even possible, in both of your opinions?
Well, I'll say quickly, I think there's a false division between humans and Catholic. This letter that came out from a student last week when we heard comments on the bulletin. There's, again, this knee-jerk reaction. If somebody is standing up for Catholicism, they must be hateful. They must hate justice. They must be homophobes. They must be sexists. And that's going to be very tedious. It's part of multiculturalism, diversity. The Jesuits invented languages. The Jesuits invented agencies. We could solve that problem by actually teaching what the church teaches, and actually looking at the lives of the Jesuits, looking at their works, and stop making these crazy assumptions that have been fed to us simply through perfect ignorance, impressive ignorance. That's
I think the balance is always a work in progress. We never get it right. Decided. So, I'm sorry to disappoint you. So yeah, but it's I think it's easier probably for people to talk about things outside themselves, so social justice. But the key things are spiritual. In my relative, when I was in Toronto in studies, so I got to know, I had a mess of relatives in central Canada, so I got to know these folks. My parents' age, a little bit older, a fair number of them died. Well, they were, almost all of them, born and raised Roman Catholics. They were educated at Catholic schools and colleges in Canada. And they were doctors, lawyers, accountants, all sorts of professions, engineers even, you know, and there were all sorts of backgrounds, and they married, raised kids, and all that. So I got to know them. I'm a Western Canadian. I got to know them when they were in some of them in their 70s, late 60s, 70s, and like. This is back 30 years ago. Fine people. Every single one of them said the courses that meant the most to them over the span of those decades after they finished college were their philosophy and theology courses. Every single one of them said that. There were no exceptions. Now, they were successful and they were serious about their professions, and I presume they were good at them, and all that. But I was very struck by that something really sat with them over the years, that my colleagues teaching these courses were having this rich impact over many decades. Now, of course, they went to Catholic colleges when, in the 1940s and 50s and the like, so the settings were different, the ethos of Catholicism, the way things were done, different. I'm not going to say better, I'm not going to say worse, they're just different. But this stuff lasted with them a long time. And they also said, several of them said, I resisted those courses, they were too abstract, they didn't mean much to my career, they weren't part of my life plan, and then they are decades later saying, that's the stuff that meant the most. Now, to the extent we are all bought into the consumer mentality, you can tell that it's easy for us to say, no, I don't need those courses and I don't want them, so they should go away. So I'm very resistant to that. I think it is difficult to teach required courses to young people who maybe don't buy into the notion that these are valuable, don't automatically, and maybe graduate their Sunday graduation, and they still don't think their philosophy courses or theology courses are valuable. But they may be wrong about them, and I wouldn't want to, I would say when you find out whether the liberal arts Catholic education is valuable, you don't find it out on graduation Sunday, you find it out years later. That's at least some of us do. So that's my 2 cents of sort of push. Yeah.
Dr. Cunningham, when you were speaking, you mentioned, you brought up Gonzaga's 35-year plan to reduce their carbon footprint. Why they couldn't put the effort into coming up with a plan like the Ignatian integration core curriculum. And you said, well, they're not even interested. And I was just curious as to your opinion as to why that may be. Of why do we promote, oh, we're Gonzaga, we're a Jesuit Catholic institution, but that isn't being taught or that isn't seen on campus. So I'm curious why you think.
That's the huge question, and I tried to touch on it in my closing remarks. I think it's a historical problem. The students who are in my History 112 class know that I spend a lot of time railing against modernization, which puts me on to, well, almost everybody who's invested in the modern progressive mindset. It is like any other historical construct. It's going away from reading the papers. This world's about to implode. So I think most of these are consequences of historical forces. Historical forces are, of course, products of human decisions. And I could get into all kinds of interesting things about how the angelic hierarchies work to actually influence the course of history. But I think it's just kind of a zeitgeist. I think that modernization just took hold of everybody almost like an intoxicant. And even, the church, which had a very strong sense of being outside the world, perfectly countercultural inside the historical process, said we give up. We're part of this process. It's bigger than us, and I don't think we will not understand the real meaning of Vatican II for several hundred years. It's very easy to form judgments about, oh, that was terrible. It was inspired by the Vatican II was a church council, and it spoke truth. But the interpretation of it from so close is guaranteed to be wrong. But at least on the surface, it looks like the church just sort of acquiesced to the greater power of a very, very compelling historical. That's the history. Is that a good answer? Does that make sense to you?
I have a question that sort of builds off this. The core of the question is what marks a person and an institution as having a Catholic identity? And I'm particularly interested in this in light of your comments during your primary talk regarding how the Enlightenment was at odds with Catholicism, and then the question during your response on 4/2013, what do we want to be? So I'm sort of curious how the sort of historic contingencies both relate to how we understand Catholic identity and what Catholic identity is rightly understood, or should be rightly understood as.
That's a good question. I'll just give a very quick answer to what I'm thinking is we go more on something that we theological background. I guess the core, I'm something of an Augustinian dialectician. In the immediate wake of Christ's career on earth, he died and resurrected, and people were expecting him to come back. And maybe didn't for a while. So the early Christians were the most unhistorical people that lived. They were waiting for this return. It didn't happen. So the Christians had to figure out a way to rejoin the world. And I think the guideline for this was the city of God by St. Augustine, where he says, okay, there is a city of man, there is a city of God. They're distinct. Don't confuse the two. And so it's obviously up to every Catholic to determine what living out the faith means to that Catholic. But in terms of historical identity and what historical institutions do and don't do, it sounds overly simplistic, but if you are not, I think St. Ignatius summed it up, everything you do is for the love of God. God holds us, as my very senior colleague, Father Navoni, is fond of saying, our very existence is held together by the love of God. If that isn't your priority, you are automatically wrong. You're automatically screwing up. So anytime you try to create a human institution or even a religious institution that isn't based upon fundamental truth of God's love for us and the love that we give back, the human reality of God calling to us and us responding, you're already heading off the road. But that's about all I can say. It's not very sophisticated, but that's what it is, and that's where you begin. And you build, that's the basis, and you build your superstructure around that.
And I would maybe take a more Thomistic, maybe, again, I'm a political science professor, so I know everything, but a Thomistic sense that the institutions are human institutions, universities, for example, may cooperate with grace and may not, or may do both at once. That our capacity to make perfect institutions is quite limited. It doesn't exist. But our capacity to cooperate with grace is not small either. So it's a continual conversion in my life or the life of an institution, an organization such as a 125-year-old Gonzaga University, converting to being Catholic and converting to be helpful in the world we live in. So I think we can cooperate with grace, but we have to exercise discernment, we have to exercise good judgment, and we will get things wrong. And we live in a pluralistic world in which and we have to understand how to live and work amongst others in a positive way. So I think it's work. And I think Eric and I maybe differ on how our anxieties about this, but Gonzaga University could slip away from being Roman Catholic and become, like Eric mentioned, colleges and universities that let slip away their Methodist identity, their Presbyterian identity, their Baptist identity, and some of them have worked to get that back, and it's hard work. So this stuff can slip away if we don't look at it and try to cooperate with Grace in a pluralistic, ambiguous environment in which we should be careful not to think that we have it right 100% of the time. We should be careful not to make an idol of our convictions or even our faithfulness. So I do think it's work, and I'm not sure we're doing it. And I'm not sure if we're doing it, I'm not sure we're doing enough of it. And I think there's some things we're not working at too much, perhaps because we fear to. And don't think that if we all did hard work, that we all end up agreeing with one another.
I'd actually like to ask a question about that process of discussion that you talked about. And one dimension we might look backwards and one we might look forwards. The dimension of looking backwards is Gonzaga has an identity for which numerous people have sacrificed and given money and worked. And to have a discussion, should Gonzaga be a Jesuit Catholic humanist institution at this time, is sort of like a group of the Gonzaga basketball team getting together and saying, maybe we want to do macrame instead of basketball. We would say there's something wrong with that because the institution or the group already has an identity. So that's the looking back part. And I think there's a concern on ethical grounds. You might talk about a betrayal of trust. The looking forward is, and Professor Cunningham just alluded to this, if we're going to have a conversation on campus about whether we want to remain Jesuit Catholic humanist, it's complicated by the reality on the ground that numerous faculty and administrators have been hired without asking them in a really blunt and probing way before they were hired, are you interested in contributing to this? So the problem is if we have this conversation now, I think this is what Professor Cunningham was suggesting, maybe the cows have already left the barn here, and that means that conversation is fated to fail. I wonder what either of you have to say about either the looking back or the looking prospectively.
Well, I don't emotionally and personally inclined toward that pessimism, and I think this is maybe I'm inclined to think that these things they ebb and flow, and if we Catholics and others want to make more vivid, more active, more appealing the Catholic identity, we'll have to work on it. But it won't happen because somebody from the top tells us to do it. That's just not how universities work very well. And it won't happen if we try beating up on our opponents or people we think are opponents. So I'm not sure I'm right. I mean, the pessimist might be right. But I still think it's possible. I think it's even necessary. What's the university's service to the wider church? It's to wrestle with the real appeal and virtues, yes, of a secular individualistic society, and still come out with a positive affirmation of faith in the risen Lord and the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's and so I'd give it a go. I wouldn't give up this ship just yet.
Sort of just going off that last question about sort of where, looking behind us and then looking forward, and just sort of what you were saying, Professor, about it's going to take a lot of work. Sort of something that I've noticed this discussion is talking a lot about what's going on, but I'm just curious, like, how do you work towards that? Like, what's something concrete? What's something that you can do to make this better? Sort of provide a solution, I guess.
I guess I'm not. I think, of course, we must work all the time. But I'm an optimist in that I'm looking forward to a major historical catastrophe that will help fix all of our. As I mentioned in some of my classes, where you're looking at the world right now, the only thing worse than the world coming to some sort of horrific unraveling would be its continuation in the mode that we're in. In the mode that we're in, no amount of work is going to fix anything because there's not enough of us left to do it. And the people that aren't like us have absolutely no interest. They're indifferent to hostile to the very project. Now, if everything falls apart, you have a wonderful opportunity. What's the old expression? Christianity loves a crumbling empire. Right? So here you've got an economic collapse, and suddenly, the day we have a major economic meltdown, which I can't believe it hasn't happened yet, we're going to have to sit down and say, okay, what do we do? And that's the day where we're going to either, make it happen properly, at which point our work will bear fruit, or we just fall into oblivion. But as long as we've hitched our horses to the modern progress, the modern world, we will follow it into oblivion or chaos or some sequential arrangement of the two. So, but that's optimistic. So,
if I may say, I would answer your question this way. I have friends in all sorts of quote-unquote camps across the faculty. Been here 23, almost 24 years. A lot of good people. I think it would behoove us to, before we say where's the solution, to say how well do we understand ourselves and one another. So I said before, I'll say again, I think the real work is at the horizontal level. We have statements from the present and past popes, we have statements from the bishops, we have statements from Catholic University presidents, we have gobs of documents to read and the like. And they're good. There's no reason not to read them. Lots of good reasons to read them. But I think what's missing is the living conversation amongst us. And absent that, the road ahead is difficult. It's difficult with that. We don't all agree. In fact, there's temperamental differences. And you see one of them between Eric and myself. I've known Eric since he came here, a very fine man. But we have a different temperament on these things. That's not necessarily decisive. Shouldn't be. So I think my hope that there is time and hope if there be patience and the courage to talk. That's my 2 cents. It's actually more expensive considering their tuition.
More question for Dr. Gillette. I've heard you several times refer to the importance of extending the consideration of this problem not only to receiving instruction from above, but having a horizontal discussion. I wonder if you think it would be important to take it one step further, because horizontal discussions, as I've seen it on faculty and students myself, descend into shouting matches or shutting matches, as it's put.
Yeah.
So to have this clarity of purpose and removing the strife, do you think that not only increasing teaching of church doctrine, but practical asceticism becoming part of what it means to be a Catholic university is something that should be pushed for or talked about seriously?
Oh, I agree.